Hey everyone, I just want to give you as quick of an introduction as I can. This is already a long video, but it's definitely worth your while. Uh, just want to give you backstory for those that don't know. I interviewed one of my brothers, Clint. I am one of four brothers. Justin's the oldest. He's a year older than I am. Then Clint is about 4.5 years younger than I am. And then Tyler is 4.5 years younger than him. But back in 2018, if you don't know, I've talked about it even in church. But Clint and Jillian, his wife, his amazing wife, uh, they had their firstborn child, but he was stillborn. But they knew that was coming because they had this fatal diagnosis called anencephaly even before. But um, it was how it came about is still gut wrenching and was completely unexpected and entirely painful. So to check out his story unfold and what he was going through, what they were going through, in the description, check it out. The link, frailfather.com, is Clint's blog. It's tough to read through. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, but it's his story, and that's why I interviewed Clint, uh, so we could really talk about lament, something that is missing in most churches, and I would say to some point at least our own. And so that's the backstory. It's all about going to God over the loss of my nephew, Clint and Jillian's son, Eli, back in November 8th, 2018. Um, but also in this, just to give you some point about who we are, we talk about being brothers for a little bit too. We have a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. And in fact, the story at the end is the best. It's called the SWAT story. It's the full story. It's awesome. It is. So you want to make sure that you listen to that too. But everything in between is so on. Um, but one of those things I want to talk about is at some point I don't question it very well when I'm talking to Clint. So let me just tell you quickly. There was a point where this news came to my family that Eli, finally their firstborn, had this fatal diagnosis of anencephaly, and when we found that out, I didn't say anything. I was quiet. I didn't call Clint and Jillian. I didn't text. I did nothing, and that really hurt Clint. We finally met at Chick-fil-A in Lancaster, so we could sit down and talk. And the reason I hadn't said anything was because we had just found out we were pregnant, and I felt incredibly guilty, and like I had no idea how to even bring it up. So I was silent, but it still hurt Clint, and so we sat down, and I finally told him why. So as the interview is going on, that's the scenario that we're talking about. But one more thing about Clint, he's part of Disciple Makers, awesome ministry, kind of like Crew, where they disciple college students, and he's based in Lancaster. He's the Lancaster leader. Um, so you can see him at a lot of like conferences and podcasts and stuff like that. And so that's as quick of an introduction as I can give. Hopefully, you enjoy this in a way that it really refreshes your soul, and that we can really benefit and praise God through this. So, thank you for watching, everyone. So, um, I've known you as my brother as long as you've been alive, um, and vice versa.
I haven't known you as long as you've been alive.
I know, but since you've been here, you've known me as your brother. So, the way I always describe it, growing up with the four of us, I always describe that me and Justin fought a lot, but then you and I fought even more. But in my perspective, then you and Tyler fought even more. And I remember one time you guys being in, I think it was the great room, and literally just come in and just start fighting over a spot. Like you, in my young perspective, rolling my eyes, like, oh, you guys is youngins, you couldn't even be in the room for 5 minutes without fighting. So, long explanation to say, like, what was your perspective? Did you fight more with me from your memory, or more with Tyler? And I really don't care if it's me, because I know I was a jerk back then.
Me too. I don't know. I've always considered it a privilege to have an older brother to annoy and a younger brother to pick on. Um,
Oh, the joys of being the middle children.
yeah, right. So yeah, you experienced that too. I don't know. I don't know if I could quantify, like, did I fight more with you or Tyler? I feel like I probably I probably fought more with Tyler because he was younger than me, so I knew I could always win. So like I would provoke him and then also be able to like overpower him. So it was always a sure victory.
Is there any argument specific that you can think of?
With Tyler?
Yeah. Or even with me.
Oh man. No, I'd have to think about that.
Like, the one thing I remember kind of in that realm, but not really fighting, was, and I've shared the story with the students before, but when I this wasn't to fight, this was just being stupid and jerky and annoying my younger brother. When you had that spy gear, that, like, the headphones to hear through the doors, and I just picked it up. I remember being in the basement, picking up and just yelling into it. I don't remember what exactly transpired right after that. I just remember mom and dad, like, taking me to the hospital or something too.
Yeah, I went deaf in one ear temporarily.
I've never felt that bad in my life.
Good.
Like, I was like, I just made my brother deaf. Like, I was seriously scared that that was it. Your hearing was gone, and I couldn't live with myself for the rest of my life.
Oh man. Yeah. Wow. That is a good one. I forgot about that. Not that I forgot about
No,
that.
that's good. That's good that you forgot.
Oh man. I don't know. I mean, there was nothing as dramatic to Tyler. I feel like because of his heart condition, like I had to take it easy on him, you know?
Side note, everyone, Tyler has a heart condition. So
Yeah, right. And he's healthy, he's good, but like physically I wasn't able, I mean, I still mess with him, but I already had that older brother guilt without even doing anything to him because of his heart condition. So mine was just more like psychological torment. So,
classic.
so the story he'll
I don't want to
tell.
mess with his heart, but I can mess with his head.
Yeah. Um, the story he tells often is I think he watched like a scary movie with us that he wasn't supposed to see, and it might have even been like a Christian scary
Oh,
movie.
was it that one with, like, the glasses, the sin glasses? I think
No, but I do
I
remember.
think Dad used to show that all the time. It's like, dude, the corniest thing ever.
I think it had something to do with like a demented clown or something like that. And so Tyler and I slept on bunk beds. And so one night I drew a clown on a piece of paper and I like like lowered it down so he saw it and he like freaked out. I would do stuff like that.
Nice. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of other malarkey that went on in our family. Um, but the classic story, I think, for any one of us, the most classic is the SWAT story. What is, like, the really short version of this SWAT story?
The short version is me and my friends played with airsoft guns in the church and the cops put together a SWAT team, breached the building, and arrested us.
Do you want to share um, any particulars about your experience, yourself with Eli? Because obviously, as I've talked to the students, I've shared, my perspective, and the best that I can, your side, even sometimes pulling, like, quotes and stuff from either your talks or whatever, or your blog. Like, so I've done that, but is there anything that you can maybe give a little bit of a snapshot of your experience? It's of course very different coming from the source, basically, you know. Um, so that's why I wanted to do this, is because like you can talk about it, but even me, I've, as I said, like yeah, I am like I'm very affected, but in terms of grief, it's nowhere near like, and it just can't be where you guys are and have been. Um, so, but anyway, I did want to start with, the lighthearted because you're my brother, and
Right.
whether or not these students want to know, or these students may not know they want to know things about our past. They may not care, but they do, even if they don't know it, they care. So,
And no, I
um,
think it's good.
so
The only question I had was, what was your goal with the question about you, like my experience when you were silent and then you, like, yeah, like that whole situation.
I don't know. I guess for that, I just because I've mentioned it to them. I talked about. I think I was trying to. I can't remember at what point I brought it there, but it was my way of first of all bringing in. Oh, I thought I put this on vibrate. Um, bringing in, this is what the experience was like for me, and part of it, because part of for me was the guilt of, God, already have two very healthy kids. Why in the world wouldn't we experience that and allow Clint and Jillian, to have one, even one? Like that's my question, and has been my question to God. Um, kind of like, why in the world would you do that and allow that?
Hmm.
Um, like, shouldn't we experience that rather than? So that's being, like, why would a loving God do that? First, you so anyway,
Yeah.
so it was that, um and partially to come around to like, and I guess I think the question I had after that, um I think was kind of like, so what can you do? And it should be obvious of like, well, don't be don't be silent. Like,
Hmm.
so I guess it's kind of been threefold. One, my experience. Two, um what can you do? And three, just kind of a side thing of like being open to say like, dude, I really messed up. Like, I was just so stupid. It was, and it may, and I haven't talked to you about what that specifically was like
Hmm.
after the fact, to be like, to kind of be thinking what kind of damage was done, kind of thing. It's like,
Hmm.
do you realize what these kind of actions do? So, I guess a way to for me to even come back around and as openly as I can, like, yo, I messed up, and like it may have caused things that can't be, repaired. Not a relationship, but kind of like damage that was really unnecessary. So that's I guess my threefold: to be open, to give an example, and to my experience side of it.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's
That
that
makes
background.
sense. I think actually that, um, I mean, the whole thing, the hard thing is trying to get this into 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah. Yep.
that that question alone could be 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And actually, I think just to give you, um, just to relieve any burdens you might still be feeling, even though it was hurtful, um, like you have like what not to do, which is be silent. But your answer, or like that conversation that we had at Chick-fil-A that day, was so healing for me, because even just what you're explaining, what you were doing essentially was you were lamenting on our behalf. I just didn't know it. So once I found that out, and once we finally just had the opportunity to talk and connect again, like that was any wound that had been caused by you not talking was healed, if that made like, and compared to what the wounds that were caused by Eli's death, like that was a very minor, um, wound. But the fact, so the it's just even related to your questions, you were in the silence, like that's what not to do, but in the lamenting for other people who are grieving, like that's exactly what is helpful. And the fact that you were doing that and really wrestling and asking God why on her behalf, that took care, like that washed away any of the pain from the silence, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
to encourage you, but also that like you were doing both, like you know what I mean.
Being bad at one and good at another. Accidentally.
So I I can totally understand in not even in hindsight, in the moment, I can understand why it was so difficult for you to say something. Like, yeah.
And honestly, like as I'm even thinking through right now, I'm in some ways I'm kind of scared of like, but was that all there was that was I even just using my going to be born kid as a scapegoat to just mask my own fear, like oh here's like a no, this is a righteous, this is a good reason, like oh yeah, I was scared of this, but as I look back I'm kind of like, was I silent just because of my own fear, and then oh yeah, I was feeling guilty, so like that's still sometimes my struggle, like was my guilt in that really the reason why I wasn't, or was it more my own fear? So that's I I don't know where I am on that, but maybe it's
Mhm.
just because now it's like it's so far removed. I'm kind of like, maybe it's just different now anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I'm sure I'm going to be using a bunch of this right here for for that. It's not like we have to go in order or anything. So, but I just remember coming and sitting down and in Chick-fil-A and talking with Tyler ahead of time, and I guess I kind of like figured it was coming. I mean, I guess that was why I was there in the first place. Um, but Tyler's like, "Yeah, did you know? Like, why haven't you?" And so that's why Tyler was the first to really know. Um, technically, with I might have told mom and dad before that we were pregnant. I can't remember. But otherwise, Tyler was the first, and because he brought that up, I was like, "Yeah, well, this is why." So
Mm. You
yeah.
mean Tyler asked you
Hmm.
why I had it? Did I talk to him or
I
did
don't
you?
know. I don't know. I'm sure you probably mentioned it to him, to Tim, and even if it was in passing, like like Luke hasn't said anything yet, like, and Tyler probably picked up on the pain of it and the hurt from that, of like what, like where's the other brother kind of thing. So
Mm. Because I don't remember, like, it must have been just a small passing comment because doing I was doing everything I could to not talk to anyone else about it because I didn't want to like start gossiping or like, raking your name through the mud or anything like that. So I'm surprised that he knew. It must have been a minor passing comment, but I have no idea why. So
maybe it was just, maybe Tyler was actually being intuitive, like, I'm not saying he's not, I'm just
you can put that in the interview.
yeah, rag on the littlest brother. Joseph will throw you in the well before you rule over all of us. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, well,
Well, look, just to so you can try to rid your conscience of any guilt. I don't think there's any point in dwelling on the past, and there's not even an ounce of ill will towards you. Like I'm not exaggerating. It was all washed away in that conversation at Chick-fil-A. So there's no, there may be benefit in terms of like thinking about the past in terms of learning from it, if in case someone else goes through something similar. But in terms of you and me, wiped clean at that Chick-fil-A. So
So if there's any takeaway, it's not just the silence, but that Chick-fil-A can heal as well. If you're going to bring tough stuff, do it in a Chick-fil-A.
exactly. So no
Well,
important conversations on Sundays.
yeah, if only we had a Chick-fil-A around here. Well, anyway, that's rabbit trail. Um, well, yeah, that's I don't know, but that's why I'm wondering, like, as I look back, you know, was that the real reason for me? And so maybe there's a part of this kind of like wanting to weirdly hold on to it and keep going to the past. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, so I probably should just shut up and move on myself, you know, like, okay, even if you were, if it, you know, like, no, masking your own fear with this, then it's done. Get over it. Um, so anyway, so hopefully that should be that. Maybe even if you have anything else that people can do, I guess, you know, is there anything else besides not being quiet, like,
And
especially at this, maybe even at this time when we can't be next to each other?
yeah, I mean, I think the idea of being present is probably what captures the most helpful thing, being present. And that doesn't necessarily mean physically present, especially now, but being present in the way that you communicate. So like regularly checking in, asking how they're doing, emails, sending cards and notes, sending gifts. Um, you know, like even what you've done, you wrote a poem on behalf of Eli. I feel like what has helped us in our suffering is the number of people who have remained present, even though they weren't always physically in the room. Because with our complicated grief, we needed a lot of space, but we didn't. If we had been distanced from people, I don't know what we would have done. But there was just so many people who wrote cards, kept sending gifts, still send cards and texts to this day. Um, so the main thing would be being present. And then the other thing I would say is let them do the talking. Because I think there's a lot of, it feels like you have to choose between being silent or saying something stupid, you know? And of course, people would much rather not say anything at all than say something hurtful. But I think reframing it in that you don't actually have to do much talking when someone's suffering. You want to ask questions and let the hurting person do the talking, which I think is also the idea of lament. It's having the sufferer give voice to their pain. So, yeah, I would say be present and let them do the talking.
Yeah, and that's, you know, we want to interject our own stuff, but at the same time, hopefully that kind of gives um, an ease about it, because you, especially like with students, I can understand being like, I don't know what to say. It's like, well, then good, you're in the perfect spot then, and so just kind of be there. So it kind of I don't remember. As I have these questions in front of me, that one like would really lead into one of the other ones, but um, so I'm just wondering, like, I'm sure people would never say this to your face or anyone else's face of like, you know, why don't you just get over it already, you know? But that attitude is out there, and it's probably the further removed someone is from a situation, from that person, is more likely for someone to think about that, like, oh, they're still harping on that, you know, like why don't you just get over it? Um but for those, especially in your case, like that might have even just that attitude of, why can't you get over your grief already? You know, what would you say to someone who would even have the audacity to let that kind of attitude be known?
Mhm. Um, yeah, thankfully, no one has ever been foolish enough to say something directly to us like that. But I do think there is a pressure by our culture to have that mentality. Um, thankfully, again, not a lot of people are going around saying to other people, just get over it. But I do know that there are people who have heard that from really close friends who have gone through severe loss. Um, so I would say that mentality just isn't biblical. Like that is a cultural lie that we believe that we have to, pull ourselves together, get over it, overcome our grief, overcome our sadness and sorrow. But in the scriptures, I mean, you look at Jesus in John 11, he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. And he doesn't say, get over it. He doesn't say, like, guys, just watch. I'm about to raise him from the dead. He weeps with the people who are weeping. Um, that's a pretty profound example. Like, what does Jesus do with people who are grieving? Even though he's going to help them get over it, in just a moment or two, he weeps with them and he lets them sit in their sorrow, and he sits in that sorrow with them. Um, he also says, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who weep. So I think the scriptures as a whole give a lot of permission to sit in the sorrow, to acknowledge the pain and the suffering, and not rush to get over it. So that would be my response.
Well, is there ever a time where it's kind of like, all right, you're just holding on to your grief, or like someone that's, I don't know, an extreme example would be maybe someone that's wanting attention, even if they're not fully aware of it, but they're holding on to it because it's their thing. Like, is there a difference there? Is there a point to then be like, okay, you do need to get over this grief?
There are probably, well, there are ways to grieve unhealthily. So there are unhealthy ways to grieve. But even if someone's doing that, like, let's say, I mean, I don't even want to like give examples because I don't want to assume, but if there are cases where someone is potentially looking for attention, like, that should tell you something and actually give you more compassion, especially if it's over the loss of someone, like if someone is needing to share more and talk more about their loved one and express their sadness, they don't need someone to come tell them to shut up. They need someone to go listen to them. That's why they're doing it. So yeah, there are unhealthy ways to grieve and deal with pain. And that's where I think the role of the church and the role of professional counseling and really good, compassionate friends comes in. But the answer is not to say, you're doing this unhealthily. The answer is, well, go be present, let them do the talking and ask questions about how they're feeling and why they're saying things in certain ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask that one because I know that, especially students, you're thinking like, oh yeah, but there's this exception, so you want to kind of find a way around it sometimes. And we have known personally, we have known people that are kind of in that area, and so we want to make sure that we're erring on the side of compassion, which is basically, you're not erring, you're being compassionate. So
Right.
I just want to bring that because I know that's in the back of someone's mind. It's like, yeah, but so
It's easy to critique from a distance. It takes a lot of courage to step in compassionately and actually talk to the person and see what they're feeling and ask them about their pain. So that's what I would say. Like, don't stand off from a distance and critique. Step in, be the courageous person to show compassion.
we keep hearing over and over, even in the songs and stuff like that, like, yes, we have victory in Jesus. And you know even we sing and talk about, death, where's your sting, where's your victory, and and all that, and like, we shouldn't fear death and all that. But so how do we kind of take those messages, and everything, and at the same time wrestle with this grief and lament?
Well, I think looking at the actual passages, like, there are so many Christianese phrases that have become like the cliche response to death and suffering that are regularly taken out of context and not actually something that the Bible says. So even like the biggest one I think is Romans 8:28. For all things work together for good for those who love him. That's like the band-aid verse that we throw onto suffering. Um, but the context of that verse, Paul's talking about how we groan in our suffering, that the world is groaning, we are groaning, and God is groaning with us. So when you take Romans 8:28 out of the Bible and you leave behind all that stuff, it makes it seem like, oh, well, God's going to work this together. So just have faith and trust. When in Romans 8, the point is we are grieving and groaning until we see how God is going to work them out in eternity, not in this life. So um, overall, I would say rather than like taking these phrases of victory and overcoming and all that, to look at what the Bible says about pain and suffering. And there's a balance of, yes, we do trust God's victory. We do trust that Jesus has defeated death, but it's not been fully destroyed yet. And so we grieve and we groan and we wrestle and we lament until Jesus returns.
But is there still merit in that for believers in Christ to know that he himself did conquer sin and death? So I mean, you can't just throw that out like, well, he didn't
Right.
do anything, So it's like,
Yeah.
what do we do? And what about people that are like, hey, Jesus defeated, is like, so what do we do with that on a, I don't know if you want to say regular basis, outside of our grieving times?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, the fact that Jesus defeated death is the only thing that has given me and Jillian hope in our grief. Because if he didn't, then like it's so much more hopeless. Like if there's not hope beyond the grave, this pain is horrible and nothing is going to come of it, you know? So I would say the hope of the death and resurrection of Jesus is just that, it's hope. But we often equate hope with like a positive emotion, but hope is not an emotion. Hope is a belief and something to anchor us in. So there are days and times where it's like, yes, this is awesome. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to rejoice in the hope that we have. There's also reality of which I'm going through terrible pain. Yes, I have hope, but it doesn't really feel that good right now. So I would say hope grounds us, but hope allows for both the dark and the happy emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so kind of with that, I can see where you've been coming from and everything, but I guess for clarity, for students or anyone that's kind of, who would ever kind of see the story, is like, you seem to be like on a mission to talk about and bring up lament. It's your conferences, your breakout sessions. I know, like with Disciple Makers, that's what you focus on, or your blog, or a couple different podcasts that you've been on, and that's what you like. You seem to be on mission for the lament idea. Like, why is that? Why is that?
I like the way you put that, on mission for lament. I am. Yeah. I mean, I have a deep conviction, and it's not only because of what we've gone through. Actually, the main reason why I'm so driven is because of how regular it is in the scriptures and how irregular it is in our churches. A third of the Psalms are laments. It comes up in almost every book. And I already mentioned, like Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who weep. There's lamenting in the Christmas story. There's lamenting in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus laments when he goes into Jerusalem. He laments from the cross. In Revelation, the saints are lamenting. I mean, it is all over the scriptures, and yet it is painfully rare in our churches. And especially when you think about the songs that we sing, if the Psalms kind of should help shape our worship, and if a third of them are comprised of people asking really uncomfortable questions of the Lord, and really being honest about their pain, and yet that almost never comes up in a lot of our songs, we need to do something about that distance. And it's not just that, oh, like we're just missing this genre of music, like on your Spotify, Oh, I just don't have rap on my Spotify. Like, it's not just we're missing a genre. This is the song that God gives his people for suffering. So by not singing the song that God gave us to sing for suffering, we are hurting people more when they need our help the most. We're hurting ourselves more when we need lament the most. So on the one hand, it's personal because that's the song that we need and we needed in the darkest days of our lives, and that's true for other people as well. But mainly, it's a biblical conviction. Like, this is all over the scriptures, so it needs to be all over the church. So I will not rest. That's not true. I'm not on like a
Yeah.
conquest. I
Bust into the church. Have you lamented today? Oh no. Let's do this.
right. Yeah, no. I mean, a year ago, I felt like I was more on a conquest, but that was more part of how I was grieving. But now it's just more of a passion that I have because this is the sort of thing that God gives us, and it's so helpful to those inside and outside the church. So I really want to see the church lament more.
Is there anything that is kind of common to lament over that we miss?
Common to
I don't know, something that we experience and for whatever reason, whether that's, mask it over with, no, you need to go over it and praise Jesus, or it's just something we kind of ignore, or we don't realize, is there, I don't know, I'm just wondering. I haven't really thought of it. It just popped in my head. Like maybe there are things in our life, maybe even especially students, but in any of our lives that we just don't realize. Oh, we should probably really lament over this.
yeah. I mean, that is a good question. In our personal lives, I think there are regular things that we can be lamenting over, um, whether it's like just the loss of plans or the loss of dreams. There's also feelings of anxiety, depression, anger, insecurity. All those things. Those are emotions that the psalmists were bringing to the Lord. But then when you extend that to our communities and poverty and homelessness and sickness and cancer and death, and then you extend that to the world, there is never a day when there's not something to lament over, which is why I think it's so common in the Psalms, both personally and corporately, that people were lamenting over the pain in their lives and the lives around them.
Yeah. um, so how has your experience with all this translated, helped or whatever during this quarantine time, or has there been any kind of correlation with that?
Yeah. And again, it's pretty interesting if you read like a lot of the popular Christian articles and blog posts. There's a lot of people responding to the pandemic with, well, here's what God is doing, or here's what we can be learning. And there have been very little responses of, we just need to recognize this pain that we're experiencing as a world and lament it and bring it to the Lord. And rather than offering answers, to ask him questions like they do in the Psalms, like, why are you allowing this to happen? How long is this going to happen? How long are we going to experience this? Um, so I think lament actually gives a very, very appropriate response to what we're experiencing right now, both at a personal level, the losses that we're experiencing, and then at a global level. There have been some really good articles and resources that people have been putting out with regards to lament, but it's been, compared to what most people are saying, it's very minor. Whereas I think that would have been one of the most common responses if the psalmists were around today. They would have been lamenting in order to get to a place of trust and praise.
Yeah, I feel like those questions are definitely there of, God, what are you doing and how long is this going to be? Like, so what is the difference between having those feelings and thoughts and then at this time in quarantine actually taking that step of lamenting? What do you think that looks like? Is there anything that we should be doing or can do with those?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at a personal level, it could be as simple as just praying in that way, like asking the questions, explaining the experience. You know, the psalmists take time to describe what they're feeling and what they're experiencing with the Lord and ask him why he's allowing it or what he's doing in it. So at a personal level, I would just encourage people to pray in the way that you see the psalmist pray. But then in addition to that, I found a benefit in writing things out and journaling or just writing out prayers. Again, that's what the psalmists are doing. They're taking their pain and they're literally, you know, writing down their questions and they're crafting it into a poem or a song. But then as a people, I think we can be praying in these ways as well. So taking up the Psalms, like Psalm 13 is a really good example, and making it our own as we pray and just replacing the psalmist situation with our situation. So Psalm 13 talks about how long, you know, will you allow my enemies to pursue me? So we may not have physical enemies pursuing us, but how long will you allow the coronavirus to, you know, X, Y, and Z? So I would say personally, and as, you know, small groups or as youth groups or as a church, to pray and to sing in the way that the laments are singing and just make it relevant to our circumstances.
Have you I'm just curious now. Have you ever like actually put music to one of those psalms or heard it other than, you know, that one song, which I don't think is it straight from a psalm? I can't remember. That
The
lament one.
Seacoast worship one,
Yeah.
that's not from a specific psalm, I don't think.
Yeah.
I haven't, but I've been trying to work with some people to try to do it. I sometimes get frustrated when like someone will take a lament psalm, like Psalm 42, for instance, is such a good lament psalm where the writer is wrestling with God and he lands in wanting to praise God again, but he isn't yet. So it's like a minor key song, like it's not a happy song, and yet a lot of people take Psalm 42 and make it like as a deer panteth for the water. um, Again, I'm not trying to knock people who are taking the Psalms, but we're missing the tone and the difficulty in that psalm. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of people who are writing the songs of sorrow for the church. So I wish I was more talented in songwriting because I would absolutely do it. Or I wish I had like a connection to Hillsong or Bethel, and I would ask them to do it.
Right. So you have to get the full effect. Um, so the SWAT story. What is the SWAT story?
And you want the full story because again, this is like really want me to tell it. This is a 5 minute. This could be like the additional exclusive for the interview.
It could be, yeah. All right, so full story, and maybe at the end, after it's all told, retell it in even shorter, but after. So
Okay.
yeah, let's do the long version.
Well, I'll try to be brief anyway.
Yeah.
So we lived on church property because our dad was a youth pastor. And Tyler, our younger brother, had a bunch of airsoft guns. Now, my parents were gone for the weekend, and actually they were with Tyler. So I was home alone for the weekend, and a bunch of my friends came over. So we took out Tyler's airsoft guns and started shooting each other and, you know, playing like capture the flag around the house or whatever. But we didn't have enough space to run around and really shoot each other. So I had a key to the church. So we went over to the church and started playing capture the flag with airsoft guns in the church, which actually that might sound crazy, but like we used to play capture the flag with like blow darts and like Nerf guns. So it was just taking it up a notch. So me and four of my friends running around the church in the dark with paintball masks and goggles. You know, eye safety is really important. Now the context that's helpful to know is that we grew up basically in a suburb of New York City. I mean, 45 minutes away, but a lot of our uh, friends' parents commuted to New York City, and in a post 9/11 situation, yeah, there's just extra.
Pretty close to it too, like a lot closer, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is a number of years ago. So me and my friends are running around the church in the dark with airsoft guns. We had no idea that in the next building there was choir practice, and for choir practice there was childcare. So one of the babysitters went to come into the building that we were in and just sees men running around in the dark with guns. And we were I was in high school, so I'm 18. So we were, grown men. And so she calls the cops. Yeah, quote unquote men. Yeah, boys playing with guns. So she calls the cops, and basically I think she just tells them there are men with guns in the church, and there's choir practice and children's childcare happening right now. So the police department gets the three surrounding township police departments together. They get permission to use automatic weapons. They set up a perimeter and shut down the block. I mean, within minutes, they're there. We have no idea that this is going on outside. And so we're still playing, and I'm upstairs with one of my friends, and I hear yelling and screaming going on downstairs, like, don't shoot, don't shoot. And so I tell my friend, I was like, just go check out what's happening. That sounds a little too loud. He goes out the door, and all of a sudden I hear two voices that I did not recognize, cursing, screaming, and yelling at him to put down his gun. So I knew that cops were in the building, but I didn't know that they had, basically put together a SWAT team. And so I'm looking down the hallway at the door that my friend just walked in. I have my hands up. I thought it's just two cops with handguns and flashlights. And before they even get through the door, I get knocked down from behind by other cops. And no joke, they had a riot shield. So I get knocked down with a riot shield. I get thrown into the wall, down on the ground, handcuffed, hands behind my back. And they are, I mean, it is the most terrifying experience. They are screaming, they're intimidating you, they are cursing at you, and I'm staring down the barrel of a shotgun. No joke. And they're like, telling me to shut up while also asking me what I'm doing in the building. I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Kind of like the dentist thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Except, automatic
Yeah,
weapons.
with the gun.
Um, and
Have you been flossing?
right. The embarrassing part of that is actually the cop who knocked me over was a lady cop. So she was the one holding the riot shield. So I got taken down by a lady cop. But the scary thing is, so my best friend at the time was Muslim. And so again, post 9/11, high alert for terrorism and stuff like that. What caused the screaming initially downstairs is he saw a police officer in the window. So they were setting up the perimeter. They were breaching the building, and he saw a cop in the window. So he turns and he starts yelling as he runs away in Arabic. So he shouts out a Muslim prayer.
The first thing they hear.
Yeah, the first thing they hear is a grown man with a gun screaming in Arabic as he runs through the church. So, yeah, he was traumatized. Like, legitimately, he couldn't sleep for weeks, because if anyone would have, gotten shot, it would have been him, because he was the first one they saw, and he was the one screaming in Arabic. The thing that tipped them off, that knew that they probably shouldn't open fire on us, it was our paintball masks. So they could tell that we were probably just kids playing around. So we're all handcuffed, we're all thrown on the ground, and we're all taken to individual cars on our own. But the funniest part for me was, so when my friend got taken out by a cop, he had been chewing gum, and so gum fell on the floor, and we're all like face down on the floor like this. And so my friend is on the ground, handcuffed behind his back, and the piece of gum is right here. And he was so scared and didn't know what to do that he just like puts it back in his mouth. And so as we're walking out of the church, I hear him, he's like, "Officer," and the officer's like, "What?" He's like, "Can I spit out my gum?" So yeah, that's the story.
How soon after that was done was it like, okay, we can definitely laugh about this? Like,
Uh, Pretty much that night.
Yeah. Except for the church leadership.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, you know, the impact that it had on people, we understood that it was a big deal. But in terms of like, oh my gosh, did that just happen?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So dad called me that night because they were out of town, and he was like, "So you've had an interesting night." So
But he wasn't. Was he mad? I don't think he wasn't really mad, was he?
no, I mean, again, because like we grew up on the property, we used the church building, the gym specifically, for different things, and we would do blow dart wars and Nerf gun fights and all that. So, um, at one level, like he and other people could really understand, like, okay, this isn't ultimately a big deal, but in terms of the trauma and the impact that it had on the people who were in the church at the time, it was a big deal. I mean, imagine being like a babysitter and you hear that there are people with guns, like that's like the worst nightmare ever, to be on lockdown with kids that you're taking care of. So I could totally understand and do agree it was a big deal. But at the same time, like you have to laugh about it. Like it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you got through the whole thing and not just skip to the end of this to get to the SWAT story, because everything in the middle is even more important. As hilarious and amazing the SWAT story is, but I just gotta say thank you, Clint. Of course, love you, brother, and Jillian, love you. Don't see you guys enough, even outside of the coronavirus stuff. But to my whole family, thank you and I love you. We all went through this and are continuing to go through this together. So hopefully this was a blessing to you, and there's a lot of awesome takeaways that you have as you end here. So thank you for sticking around. Check out Clint's blog, the link below. It's heavy, but it's very good. Frailfather.com. All right, thank you guys.